Welcome, welcome. If you are live or you will join in later, welcome to Transform Thinking Thursday, where we're going to talk about preventing addiction. Okay. I'm coming to you with the more practical side of myself, the professional side. We'll get started in one moment, okay? Just trying to allow people the opportunity to come in if they're going to come in. If not, we will not tarry. But I know that this information will get to who it needs to get to, and I'm hoping that it will do what it needs to do. Here we go. Hey, Charisma. All right. So I'm about to get started because I have a lot of information to relay. Let's fade this music on out. And listen, I am on two platforms right now, so I will be managing both. Hello on Facebook, and I am even sending this to, hey Rico, I'm sending this to YouTube as well. And I'm on Instagram as well. So we cooking because I need to get this information out. Let me just do a quick stream health check. What's up? What's up? Welcome in. I'm going to get started in a moment. Promise. I promise. Hey, Whitney. Welcome. 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 I am just doing a quick, I'm doing a quick stream health check. So bear with me. I just want to make sure I am good on Facebook. I see my people on Instagram, and I'm going to get started. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Please share this live. You may learn something, you may be enlightened in different ways, but we're about to get rolling because I have a lot of information to get to you. And I'm coming on a very more so practical standpoint. If anybody knows me, they know that I have balance, right? I have the spiritual side of myself, and then I have that practical side. And tonight I'm coming to you with practicality. All right. Just make sure I'm live. I'm good. I'm good. I am. All right. Let's get it going. So, I am live on Instagram and I am live on Facebook. Facebook will have more so of the visual aids, but just rock with me. Just rock with me, Instagram. And thank you for rocking with me. So tonight we are talking about preventing addiction, part one. I am just so excited about this topic. I am so passionate about it. And I will get into who I am and the version of me who is presenting on tonight. But this came to me the other day. I think after group on Tuesday night, I do group sessions and I work in addiction. So let's just get into it, right? Who am I? Who am I? I am Angela Beasley. I have a master's in clinical mental health counseling, and I am a provisionally licensed professional counselor. And I am on my way to be fully licensed. So I operate in the vein of a counselor at this very moment, right? And I love what I do. I'm so passionate about it. And I get the opportunity to be a transformationist. I get the opportunity to work sometimes one-on-one, but really now my specialty is working in a group setting. What does that mean? I'm a group counselor. I can do it all. I can do individuals and I can do groups, right? I have groups that are sometimes 2 to 3 people, and I also run groups that have up to 23, 24, 25 people. So I have essentially sharpened that side of me. I love what I do. I get to work with people who are in recovery. They are recovering from addiction. Come on in, share this live. Thank you. But I love what I do, and I get to watch people transform their lives. I get to walk on the side of them. I am not in the front of them. I'm not behind them, but I get to walk side by side and watch people transform their lives. Okay. So that is who I am. I am an addictions counselor at the moment, but I do it all. Now, what is on the docket tonight? So What's on the docket? Tonight, we're talking all things about preventing addiction. That is the purpose of this live. So I already talked about who I am. I'm going to get into my mission. We're going to define addiction. What is it? We're going to talk about the differences of tolerance, dependence, and addiction. We're going to talk about the roots of addiction. How is addiction formed? We are going to get into something called the stages of change. And then we're going to talk about preventative measures, okay? And last but not least, I will give you a few resources to help you out, okay? So, why am I doing this? First of all, I am like a media specialist. I do media on the side, and I just believe that I'm walking into this season of education and helping people transform their lives in different ways as I transform as a counselor, as a woman, as an individual, right? So the other day after group session, I already established I work in addictions, right? So after group session, I was like, man, this would be a great topic. And even though it's spur of the moment, it was kind of sporadic. I wanted to come and talk about this topic because I think if people understood this public health issue of addiction and how it forms, we would have less people, not as many people forming addiction and having to come into rooms like mine to manage or learn how to live with addiction, right? And I am coming on the practical side because I have a spiritual side that feels like there's another way to combat it, right? However, so with that being said, yes, indeed. And you already know because you work with the public. This is our realm. This is our place. Whitney said a huge public health issue, and I totally agree. So, what is my mission in life, and especially for tonight? My mission is to educate, to motivate, and encourage you to transform your thinking and shift into the best possible version of yourself, one step at a time. So, that is what the goal is tonight, and to educate about addiction. Okay. So, let's get into it. What is addiction? Addiction defined. All right. Here on the screen, I'm going to give you many different views or perspectives of what addiction is, but essentially, addiction, also known as substance use disorder, is defined as a disease that affects a person's brain, their behaviors, and results in the compulsive need either for a substance or to participate in a specific behavior despite adverse consequences. So essentially, addiction is the end result of tolerance and dependence, the use of a substance in one way, right? It is the end goal that an individual struggles and still acts in certain ways and still uses certain substances no matter what the outcome is, right? Some people have severe substance use disorders where they know that the end could be death. Nevertheless, they still use. Now, some people, I think tonight will be transformative because maybe you may be dealing with an addiction, or maybe you have a loved one who has an addiction and you don't understand the quote unquote insanity of it, right? Maybe you're a little judgmental of it, but however, there is a science behind it. So we just defined what addiction is. Now let me look at my notes. So we know that addiction can be a plethora of things, right? The reason why I really like Solange's Cranes in the Sky song is because it talks about void fillers, right? It talks about different forms of addiction, in my opinion. That's the way that I translate that song, right? She started off with the lyrics, I tried to drink it away. I tried to put one in the air. That to me is kind of like I tried to party. I tried to like fill this void in that way. I tried to dance it away. I tried to change my appearance. Shopping, I ran the credit card bill up. Shopping can be an addiction, right? We know that sex can be an addiction. Food can be an addiction. Relationships can be an addiction. Gambling can be addiction or addictive. So there are so many different types of addiction, right? But I may more so hone into drug, alcohol, and substance use tonight because that is my specialty, right? Absolutely, sis. See, we here, Whitney. So drug use can lead to tolerance and dependence and then addiction. And we're going to get into what that means. And there is a distinct difference between them all. Okay. So drug use can also impact your health, cause sleep issues, injury, and accidents, and more, including death. Okay. Now, I don't have the stats, but we have seen the increase of overdosing over the past decade. So it's becoming more and more of a prevalent public health issue, right? So there's a whole neuroscience, or what I say neurobiology to addiction, which I'm not really going to get too deep into that tonight, but there is a science to this thing. But just remember the word dopamine. What is dopamine? Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. When you think about neurotransmitters in the brain, just think about communicators, something that takes messages back and forth between the different parts of your brain and even your body, right? Or it's a chemical produced by the brain and it's associated with pleasure and happiness. And you will hear, or if you understand or begin to understand an addiction, dopamine is a major factor here. Okay, so when people take drugs or substances, etc., the brain develops a tolerance to the substances used, therefore resulting in the need to ingest more of that particular substance, i.e., alcohol, drugs. There are pills. There are so many different forms of substances. Yes, your excitement or pleasure neurotransmitter. Exactly. See, I love when somebody's on the line and they talk the same language. So, upon repeated usage, the brain develops a tolerance to that thing, and it takes more and more to result in the same getting the same result. And that's a basically what tolerance is, but we're going to get into it more. Okay. So again, what is the difference between tolerance, dependence, and addiction? So let's get into it. All right. Tolerance, essentially, I'm going to try to talk more so not that science talk or clinical or clinician talk, but I'm going to try to water it down to make it palatable or understandable for everybody. Okay. So, tolerance essentially, it means there's two types of tolerance: physical and physiological, or physiological tolerance, right? And tolerance occurs when a person's physical response or mental response to a substance such as drugs or alcohol lessens over time. Therefore, it takes you having to drink more, smoke more, take more of a substance to reach that same level, right? So I want us to think about that. If you partake in alcohol, which I am neither against it or for it. Everybody has their own way, right? The practical side of me, right? So if you notice over time that you used to quote unquote feel a buzz after one drink, right? But over time, your intake has increased. Now that buzz you used to feel after one beverage, now it takes three to get to that same level. That means that your tolerance is increasing for that substance, that alcohol. Alcohol is a substance, right? So that means your tolerance is getting higher, right? And that's when we have to be careful. I'm not trying to scare you, but this is how it works, right? It starts with tolerance. Let's drive that home a little bit more. If you develop a tolerance to a substance, it becomes less effective for you. Again, for example, if you take melatonin or something to uh, go to sleep, right? It may work well at first, but over time, you will develop a tolerance for that thing. You ever took over the counter meds or something that you were sick, right? And it worked well at first, but you kept taking that thing and you notice that it's not working as well as it used to? That's tolerance. Your tolerance is increasing, right? So tolerance has the potential to lead to addiction through dependence, okay? So I hope I made that clear. So that's tolerance. That is the first step. That is the first step on this journey to addiction, right? Next up is dependence, okay? So let's put dependence up. I have my on screen aid on Facebook, but rock with me. Thank y'all for rocking with me. Dependence occurs when high doses of an addictive substance is abused. So now we're crossing that bridge into abuse. Also, feeling like one cannot function normally without use of the substance. This can be either physical or psychological and can have many negative effects on someone's life. Okay. So let's drive this point home a little bit more regarding dependence. Okay. I would call dependence a pre-morbid or a precondition that leads to addiction if you don't watch it, right? So again, dependence occurs when a person stops using drugs or alcohol and goes through withdrawal. It's essential to note that a person who experiences dependence and withdrawal is not necessarily addicted to a substance, but there are things that indicate there is dependence. So again, dependence and addiction, they're two different things. Now, when someone abuses high doses of an addicted substance, they may develop a dependence. Drug dependence refers to someone feeling like they cannot function normally without that use of that substance. And the main cause of drugs or substance dependence is long term abuse. Okay, so addiction doesn't happen overnight. It is a process. And again, if you are not vigilant or you are not educated, you can easily fall into the trap or the snare of addiction. All right. Oftentimes, when someone has developed a dependence, they first started using the drug recreationally. That is why a lot of people, and this is up for debate, but a lot of people, I see you. You said appetite, Rico, and I appreciate, and I agree with that. But you will find that people, it is a controversial subject, right? But people say that weed or marijuana is a gateway drug. Now, learning what I've been learning and knowing what I know, I can agree with that. Why? Because of this phenomenon of tolerance and dependence. The more and more you utilize that particular substance, the less and less effective or the less it gives you that same it can be. The less it gives you that same um response. Remember, we're talking about dopamine, the reward center. And again, I'm not trying to go too deep into the neurobiology, but there is a neuroscience to this thing, right? So it could be a gateway drug to saying, oh, this is not working for me anymore. It's not giving me that same high. It's not giving me that same um, dopamine release, right? It's not giving me that same feeling. And sometimes people will veer off into other substances. So, um, but yeah, so it can be start off with recreational use. And then recreational use then can turn into a dependence or a tolerance and taking more and more of that substance. And after that, it can turn into dependence, right? So now let's talk about addiction. Okay, because there's again, tolerance, dependence, and then addiction. And I always describe it as there's this bridge in between dependence and addiction. All right. So now addiction is considered that disorder, or some people call it a disease, the disease of the mind or the brain. Now, addiction, aka substance use disorder, isn't the result of a moral failing. A lot of people feel like, oh, I can't control it. I did this, I did that. I'm a failure. I'm not strong enough. No, it is not a moral failing. It has nothing to do with that. It's more so now the brain feels like it cannot function without it. It is considered the new norm, right? So again, it's the bridge between dependence and addiction, and it's not limited to just drugs or alcohol. We already established that. And we know, again, there are several types of addictions, right? People develop behaviors like shopping, being on your phone. Social media is addictive because it gives you that dopamine boost, right? Um, it could be video games. I didn't mention that one earlier. Gambling, sex, pornography, food, etc. And again, it's defined, or addiction is defined as a disease that affects a person's brain, their behaviors, and results in the compulsive need either for a substance or to participate in specific behaviors despite the adverse consequences. So, individually, it's the repeated use of drugs or alcohol or just engaging in these behaviors are not addictions. All right. There are symptomologies or symptoms that labels it or classifies it as addiction. Now, it's unlikely that you have an addiction if you often enjoy just like a occasional glass of wine with your dinner, or occasionally buying a lottery ticket. That is not addiction, right? Addiction is distinguished by a person's inability to control the behavior. It's the difficulty going without it. It's the intense craving and urges for continued action or use despite the negative consequences. Okay. And again, sometimes the consequence could be health issues, damages to the liver, but I can't stop drinking. I know what it's doing to my life. I know that it's ruining my marriage. I know that it is depleting my finances. I know that it is ruining my career, but I cannot stop, right? I know that this substance is damaging my brain. I know that it can lead to um, a DUI. It can lead to legal issues. It could even lead to death, but I cannot stop. I cannot stop engaging in it, right? And it's been reported that 1 in 14 Americans experience substance use disorder or addiction. All right. Now, that is the difference between addiction and, tolerance, because it's levels: tolerance, dependence, then addiction. Addiction is the big dog here, right? So you have levels. It doesn't just elevate to addiction. All right. All right. So let's move forward. Now, tolerance, dependence, and addiction occur due to repeatedly taking substances. However, addiction, also known as what? Substance use disorder, that's defined by the diagnostic manual, all right? The DSM-5. Um, it happens again when a person continues using drugs or alcohol and cannot stop despite the negative consequences, okay? So, although addiction symptoms vary depending on the substances, there are common effects. Drug and alcohol addiction symptoms can include changes in your behavior, such as recklessly engaging in risky activities or neglecting responsibilities. Addiction can also lead to physical changes like loss of appetite, weight fluctuation, severe fatigue. Oftentimes, sleep patterns are messed up. It leads to maybe anxiety and depression, right? Addiction has its way of changing your personality and your behavior, right? So, other signs of drug and alcohol use disorders include certain changes in mood and personality, as I just established, increased isolation from family and friends. Yes, levels for sure, Rico. Um, Slurred speech, cognitive cognitive delay or um, damage, irregular, erratic sleep patterns, erratic, frequent intoxication, hangovers, financial issues, withdrawal symptoms. That's another one. So you can notice that you have dependence and addiction when you have those withdrawal symptoms, when you stop using that substance, that alcohol, that those benzos, the other substances, drugs, right? Then there are physical withdrawal symptoms that occur. And even legal issues can all be symptoms of addiction. Now, let me say that addiction can happen to anybody. I've had people who were homeless. I've had people who are lawyers and doctors, psychologists. Addiction can impact anybody. So I don't like when people down people who deal with addictions. I don't like when people joke about it, because it's not a joke. It is a major public health issue, and it can impact anyone. Nobody's safe. Nobody's safe. But let's go deeper into it. So, before we go deeper, if you are that judgmental person, do some self examination. Take your judgments off, because it could be you. It could be your mother, your father, your cousin, your sister, your daughter, your son. It could be your best friend. Okay? So take the judgment off, because it can happen to anybody. Now, there's something called the addictive personality. And I don't have a slide for that, but I just want to talk about that a little bit. So, hello, welcome. Thank you for coming on in. So there is something called the addictive personality. And addictive personality is not a diagnosable disease or condition. And there isn't one single trait that leads to addiction, but instead, this term is used informally to describe a collection of characteristics, environmental factors, uh, and health conditions that make a person more prone to developing an addiction. Now, self disclosure, I believe I have an addictive personality. And if I don't watch it or be careful, it could be me. That's why I say don't judge, because it could be you. Hey, hey, sis. Thank you for coming on in. So here are some common characteristics or factors that contribute to addictive personality, right? Adventures or thrill seeking, right? Attention deficit disorder diagnosis, comfort with secrets or lying, desire for immediate gratification, difficulty in accepting responsibility, difficulty with self regulation, ease with risk taking behaviors, early childhood trauma. Listen, okay? Exposure to drugs and alcohol, family history of addiction, impulsivity, mental health conditions like anxiety and depression, neuroticisms, or high levels of sensitivity or nervousness, and obsessive and compulsive behaviors. Do you see yourself? Do you see anybody you love or know? Now, I'm not saying, not giving you this information so you can go and throw that around at anybody, right? But these factors are a part of the addictive personality spectrum. All right. So I'm not going to spend too much time on addictive personality because we're doing good with time. And I will be back to talk about this another time with some good friends or a good friend. We will have a part two. Okay. But let's see where I'm going with this because I have a lot of information. All right. So let's look at signs that tolerance or dependence have crossed over to addiction. I talked about that bridge, right? There are levels to this, but signs that tolerance or dependence have now crossed over to addiction. All right. The crossover from addiction or the crossover from tolerance or dependence to addiction may not be obvious at first. So, unfortunately, when you reach a certain level, it can, I want to say, sneak up on you, but not really because it was leading up to it. But there are definite signs, and here are a few, but not limited to these. You take prescription medications such as pain relievers or anxiety medications when you don't need to you don't need them anymore. So um let's say maybe you're not even experiencing those type of symptoms that need that medication, but you're still taking them. You need higher doses more often to get the same effect, and we already established that. You think about taking the drugs constantly, so there's that mental obsession, and make sure you know where you can get more and how to get more. You hide the fact that you are taking the drug or its effect on you. You lie and steal to help you get the drug. You take dangerous risks like driving under the influence. You can't skip a dose without serious withdrawal symptoms. You lose interest in things you used to enjoy. You have trouble going to and staying at work or school or even asleep, etc., etc. So those are some indicators that maybe this tolerance and dependence have crossed over into addiction. Now, what are some factors? What are some factors that lead or contribute to addiction? All right. So, some of the factors are genetics. So, addiction can run in your family. I hear stories all of the time when people have told me my grandmother and my grandfather on both sides, or my mom was an addict, and now my father wasn't, but I'm an addict, and my child's an addict, or etc. So it runs in families. uh Depression or ADHD can contribute or cause someone to want to use substances. So, mental health issues such as depression, again, ADHD, anxiety, even other mental health ailments can cause one to want to use to alleviate those symptoms or the what comes with those mental health disorders. It could be early use. So people who start to use drugs when they are young, while their brain is still forming, can become addicted. That's why culturally, I hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, my mama let me taste beer when I was 3, 4, 5 years old." And I wasn't per se raised like that, and there's no judgment. But here in New Orleans, in Louisiana, that is a cultural thing where people will pull out the beer, the alcohol at the family reunion, at the crawfish boil, or they'll let their little child taste alcohol, but you don't know what you may be awakening in your child. So you want to be careful with that. Letting little kids smoke on a cigarette, or trying a black and mild, or marijuana. You want to be careful with that because you don't know what you may be awakening in that child. So early use, using drugs that are highly addictive, such as cocaine, opioids. That's your benzos, that's your Xanax, that's your Adderall, that's your Klonopin, um, things like that. Those pills, right? I forgot the other one, but or using stimulants. Well, Adderall is a stimulant, sorry, but benzos and stimulants can cause addiction to happen. Um, Peer pressure. As young people, hey there. As young people, uh like teens or even adults, even in college, right? Sometimes peer pressure, somebody may say, hey, try this, or try this, just give it a try, right? Sometimes peer pressure, and I know it sounds silly, but it's true. I've heard stories, right? It happens. And even difficult family environments can cause addiction. Okay, now I want to talk about the stages of change and go into 3 roots of addiction. I'm doing good with time. I'm doing good with time. So wait, let's go to stages of, no, I'm going to leave that last. Sorry about that, y'all. So again, we talked about some factors, right? But I typically like to talk about roots of addiction. And I basically said some of them in a nutshell, but there is no equation to addiction. So there's no this plus this plus this plus that equals addiction. That is not how it goes. We are all unique. We are all walking different paths, have different experiences, and um addiction doesn't happen the same for every person. So it's important to remember that um there is no root cause or equation for addiction formation. Everyone is unique and has different points of views, against stories and journeys. But I want to talk about or hit on 3 major causes, which is trauma, mental health, and genetics. And basically, I did hit on it, but I want to go home with it a little bit more, right? So with trauma can include, I'm here in New Orleans. Welcome and thank you for hopping in. Trauma can include physical, psychological, and emotional experiences that overwhelm your ability to cope. Trauma has a certain or a correlation with addiction. So oftentimes when I'm doing something called a biopsychosocial assessment, I'm sitting down, I'm talking with the person, I'm learning their story, I'm asking them many different questions. Not all the time, but it's very prevalent where you will see some type of trauma that has occurred in somebody's life. About 59% of young people who suffer from PTSD as a result of childhood trauma will suffer from substance abuse problems that could potentially lead to addiction. So, trauma, especially undealt with, is one root of addiction. Mental health. Mental health struggles are another underlying factor that can lead to addiction. Studies have shown that 50% of those who experience mental illness will also develop an addiction of some sort. About 1 in 4 individuals with a serious mental illness, such as major depression or major depressive disorder, schizophrenia, or bipolar, also struggle with substance abuse and addiction. And that genetics and environment piece, that nature versus nurture. right? Genetics can also affect addiction or foster or be a form of a part of the equation, right? Everybody's DNA is unique, right? But that minuscule difference can have effects on a variety of health conditions, including addiction. About 50% of your risk for drug or alcohol addiction comes from your genetic makeup. Again, that's that addictive personality. There have been studies shown that some people are born with a gene to be more um, prone to developing addiction. Okay. Also, it could be the environments that you grow up in. I find that areas with low socioeconomic statuses, there are not a lot of jobs available. There's a lot of poverty and crime, etc. People who grow up in those environments are more prone to forming an addiction. And it's sad. It's not limited to that. I'm not saying people who grow up in the suburbs and um or have more access to resources don't develop addiction, but I'm saying they are more prone to develop an addiction in lower socioeconomic statuses or regions or neighborhoods, etc. Okay. So I want to talk about I'm not going to get into it because I feel my energy going down. Your girl has been at it all day. But there's something called the ACEs, or the adverse childhood um experiences score or assessment. Now, I love doing this study or reading about it because it is an assessment that you take, and it examines many different areas of traumatic experiences that one may encounter before the age of 18. And it gives you a score. And at the end, this score tells you, or it shows you, that you may be more prone to certain things, right? You may be more prone to diabetes and heart disease and being involved in domestic violence situations, or dealing with poverty, or even suicide, or even substance abuse disorders or possible addiction based upon your score. It's so interesting, right? So this assessment, and I have it over here on Facebook, but it'll ask you different questions. Like the first question asks you, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, right? And then you have to follow the prompt. I'm not reading the whole question, but it goes through many different scenarios that one may have encountered before the age of 18. And again, at the very end, you score. If you wrote yes for a particular question, that's 1 point, right? And that goes towards your score at the very end. And the higher your score, the higher your ACEs, adverse childhood experience score is, the more prone or susceptible you are to certain things, including substance use disorder. So, isn't that interesting, right? I hope I'm not boring you. I hope I am educating you. So, this is the last thing I'm going to talk about: the stages of change. The stages of change. All right. So there is something called the trans theoretical model, and it was formed by two psychologists in the 1960s called Prochaska and DiClemente. And they talk about different stages of change when people are in the process of making a shift. Okay, when they're in the process of possibly changing their lives, right? So I talked about all of this for what reason? Why am I talking about this? Because I do want to educate you and empower you, right? But I also want to speak to those people who may be dealing with a substance use disorder, may not realize that that tolerance is shifting, and you may be entering into dependence or dependence. You could be very well on the brink of entering into addiction, or you may be in addiction right now. And if you are, that is okay, because there are facilities and there's help, right? Right. But I'm going to tie it all home in a second, right? So I'm going to put this model back on the screen on Facebook. And there are different models, there are different stages of change, right? The first stage of change is called pre-contemplation. Thank you. I'm so glad that you're getting something from this. Pre-contemplation, essentially, it means before thought. Pre-contemplation. In this stage of change, people don't even realize that there is an issue. You don't see there's a problem. The people around you may see that there's an issue, but you can't quite see it just yet. So therefore, you're not going to change. You're not going to do anything to make a difference because you don't see that there is a problem. The next step is contemplation. Now, contemplation means I see that there's an issue here. There's a problem. I'm starting to see what everybody's been telling me for the past 5 years, that I have a problem. So I'm starting to think about it, but I'm not quite committed to making a change or making a step or taking that step to fix the problem that has been identified. Then next up is preparation. Preparation is exactly what it sounds like, right? I'm thinking about Thanksgiving coming up, right? And when you're preparing to make dinner, you are grabbing things, you're getting ingredients, you're going to the store, you're shopping, you're putting things together, right? So preparation means now I am preparing to make a change. So I went from not knowing, being unaware, could be in denial, could be minimizing all of those. Forgive me, it's been a very long day. But all of those defense mechanisms that is blocking me probably from seeing that I have an issue, pre-contemplation into contemplation. I'm thinking about it. I'm not quite committed, but now I'm aware and I'm thinking about changing. And now moving into preparation. So now I'm doing the research. I'm looking for places that can help me to make a change. Okay. Then the next step is action. So actually going through it, right? And one way that I describe it to my clients, patients, is that you're in this program. I work in an intensive outpatient program, or IOP, where they spend at least 12 weeks with me, get to see me 5 times a week, at least, right? Where we are working on change, right? So now you're doing the action, now you're doing the work. Maybe you went to residential, you took 28 days or 30 days to detox or get that help, right? That's action and pertaining to addiction recovery. Then there's maintenance, right? So for some, IOP is maintenance. Intensive outpatient program is maintenance. And then there is the stage called relapse. Relapse is essentially going back into that old behavior. But the stages of change is an upward spiral. Some people can stay in that maintenance phase forever, right? They don't relapse, they don't go back to that substance, but sometimes they relapse, okay? But why am I saying that? Because tonight, some people may be in that what? Pre-contemplation phase where you don't even know that there's an issue here. But now I hope that this information is educating you, right? To change your habits that can go from tolerance to dependence, from dependence to addiction. So maybe you don't realize that you drink a little bit too much, or now that you're shifting from substance because you remember that word dopamine. We're building here. Remember that word dopamine. Now you're not getting as much dopamine as you would like, and now you're searching for other substances, right? So I hope that this information, if you're dealing with substance use or substance abuse, you are aware of it. But for my people who maybe you have that occasional drink, or you have that occasional substance, I hope that this has educated you to maybe reflect or look at substance abuse in a different way. So maybe you can prevent the possibility of addiction forming. Okay. So it is 8:52. I want to talk about some resources, and I will be back another day. I think this is enough information. I will be back another day to talk about preventing addiction or this topic even more with uh in another form another day. All right, on my screen on Facebook, I have a few resources for you. So we talked about three components or three roots of addiction being trauma. Trauma leads to ACEs, ACE apostrophe S, or adverse childhood experiences. It could be mental health issues, and it could be genetic or environmental. Here's some resources, and then I'm going to talk about some preventative measures, right? So the resources here, if you identify that you are dealing with substance use disorder or dependence, and you are having those withdrawal symptoms, and you just feel like you need a little help, you need a little help outside of yourself, there's SAMHSA, right? That's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration. And the national helpline is free, it's confidential, it's 24/7, 365 days a year. You can get referrals to getting that help that you need by dialing 1-800-662-HELP. That is 1-800-662-4357. Or you can visit findtreatment.gov. Okay. Also, I just always like to give this resource, the Suicide Prevention Hotline. You can text 988 suicide, and or the Crisis Lifeline. You can call 988 and it will lead you there. If you or anyone you know who's struggling or in a crisis, help is available. Again, it's free, confidential, 24/7, 365 days a year. And last but not least, trauma, right? There are many different types of trauma, and I'm not even going to touch that tonight. But one of the most prevalent is sexual abuse, right? So this resource is called RAINN, RAINN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. It's 24/7, confidential, and you can call 1-800-656-HOPE. That is 1-800-656-4673 to be connected with a trained staff member from a sexual assault service provider in your area. Okay, so this is the last thing we're going to talk about. So, preventative measures. We talked about the problem. We talked about how addiction forms. We talked about the roots of addiction, but let's talk about some practical ways of preventing it, right? So one way is being educated. I took all of that time to build a foundation, to give you a little meat and education of how addiction forms. So now I want you to self-examine usage, right? I'm not going to even get into it, but benzos, don't do it. They're highly addictive. Okay. But alcohol, marijuana, other substances, how they can lead to other things. Alcohol is so culturally accepted in New Orleans, Louisiana, period. However, watch it. Watch your intake, right? So we have the education, we have the understanding, we have some information that was given to you on tonight. I talked my face off, right? But what about coping skills? What about dealing with the stress, dealing with those mental health issues, right? I gave you a resource. SAMSA can also connect you to other things like mental health resources, getting counseling. Some of you believe in your higher power, God. All right. Some of you may not believe in higher powers. I deal with people who don't believe in God, and that's your way. But finding other ways to deal with your stress, deal with your trauma, deal with those things, talk to somebody, reach out, community. There are self help groups, right? If you don't have the means or the finances, most of you can access Medicaid, right? Or access some kind of insurance if your job has insurance. Call that number, see what mental health providers are or services are available to you. Deal with those issues, get to those roots, right? A lot of people utilize or abuse substances because they don't know how to cope. They were never equipped with those things, or they're hiding that trauma, not giving it attention, not shedding light on it, not talking about it. And people typically result in substance use to deal and cope, right? I don't, I'm not trying to simplify this, but going back to that song, Cranes in the Sky, utilizing things to fill voids, right? So, dealing with your trauma, dealing with mental health issues, giving that attention, finding healthy coping skills, meditation. And I'm not talking about that new age stuff. I'm talking about box breathing. I'm talking about visualization. I do those things with my patients. Nothing new age about it, right? Finding other ways to cope. And I think I need to do a live regarding coping skills, right? Um, we talked about mental health, getting that help, right? Exposing, finding ways to cope with stress, right? So preventative measures is dealing with your issues, essentially. Okay. All right. Your girl tapped out. I'm tapped. I hope this was useful to you. I will be back another day to continue on in this and to offer you some practical coping skills so we can focus more so on the coping skills next time, okay? Um I will talk to you all later. I hope this was very beneficial to you. I hope you learned something. I hope that it's something that you can pass on to others so we can prevent this epidemic, that we can change the numbers, change our communities, right? Bring exposure. Oh, the last thing is starting with young people, educating these kids about addiction and the possible outcomes, right? So it's essentially all about education. Okay. All right. I'm gonna stop before I go into a whole nother cycle of talking. Y'all have a beautiful night. I love you. And again, keep shifting, keep going higher, keep transforming your mind. Have a great night. Bye bye.